My parents sent a text saying they'd changed the locks and wished me good luck surviving alone. 2 days later, their lawyer called me in a panic, begging to meet after discovering the property they thought they controlled was no longer even legally tied to their names anymore. I was halfway through a grocery run when my phone buzzed with the kind of message that rearranges your heartbeat. The locks are changed. Good luck surviving alone. That was the entire text from my parents. No greeting, no context, just those 7 words. For a few seconds, I stood in the dairy aisle, staring at the screen while a fridge motor hummed behind me. I thought it was a bad joke. My mother, Karen, 57, was the type to leave voice notes reminding me to refrigerate leftovers. My dad, Martin, 60, kept paper copies of every warranty for future reference. Neither of them sent cryptic threats. I called immediately, straight to voicemail. I tried again. Same thing. By the 3rd attempt, my hands were sweating enough to smudge the touchscreen. The house they were talking about wasn't just a house. It was the 2-story Craftsman in Brookfield, where I'd spent every Christmas since I was 8. When I turned 25, they offered to let me live there while finishing my master's degree in environmental engineering. The deal sounded generous at the time. I'd cover utilities, they'd cover taxes, and I could save for my own place. There was no lease, just a handshake and a set of keys. I drove back immediately, half expecting to find some miscommunication. But the familiar blue front door now had a shiny brass deadbolt that wasn't there that morning. My spare key slid in and spun uselessly. Curtains were drawn tight. Even the welcome mat was gone. A cold drizzle started as I stood there. My neighbor, Mrs. Patel, peeked through her blinds, then quickly disappeared. My parents' silver Lexus wasn't in the driveway. The whole scene felt staged, like someone had scrubbed the house of any trace of belonging to me. I finally got a text from my younger brother Dylan, 19, that read, "They said you'd figure it out. Don't come to the house." No explanation, no apology, just that. Inside my car, I called him over and over until he picked up. His voice cracked with the panic of someone who knew he was betraying a confidence. "Look, I'm not supposed to talk," he whispered. "Mom says you'll understand why they had to do it. Something about teaching you independence." "Independence? By locking me out of my own home?" I snapped. "I don't know. Please don't drag me into this." Dylan hung up before I could respond. The timing made no sense. 2 weeks ago, we had Sunday dinner. Grilled salmon, my dad's favorite. We laughed about a neighbor's Halloween decorations still being up in March. My mom even slipped me a Target gift card for household stuff. Nothing hinted at a Cold War. But looking back, small things prickled. Last month, Dad casually asked if I'd kept up with the property insurance paperwork, even though he always handled it. Mom had started commenting on my temporary living situation more often, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. At the time, I chalked it up to parental fussing. I spent that first night in my car, parked outside a 24-hour diner, trying to piece together motives. Money? They weren't earning. Control? Probably. My parents loved control the way some people love crossword puzzles, quietly, obsessively. The next morning, I went to the county recorder's office, half out of spite and half to reassure myself that I wasn't losing my grip on reality. The house deed, I knew, had been a complicated matter. When my grandfather died 3 years ago, he'd left the property to my mother, but during some family tax shuffle, they'd added my name as a joint owner. I'd signed papers at the time without reading the fine print, trusting them. Now I needed proof. The clerk behind the plexiglass tapped at her keyboard, chewing gum with deliberate slowness. "Current deed holders," she finally said, squinting at the monitor. "Martin and Karen, and you." My stomach unclenched slightly. "So they can't legally kick me out?" She shrugged. "Not without a court order. If your name's on it, you have rights." Relief mixed with a new kind of dread. They knew my name was on the deed, so why act like they held all the cards? That night I crashed at my friend Caleb's apartment, scrolling through group chats where my parents' numbers sat stubbornly silent. I drafted a carefully worded text, "This isn't legal, we need to talk," but deleted it. Any response would feed their power game. 2 days passed like that. Unanswered calls, restless sleep, and a gnawing sense that I was missing a piece of the puzzle. Then, just as I was starting to plan my next move, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. "Hello? Is this Alex?" a crisp male voice asked. "Yes. This is Richard Green, counsel for Martin and Karen. We need to meet immediately regarding the Brookfield property. It's urgent." I sat up straight. "Why are you calling me?" A pause. Then the lawyer's tone softened, almost pleading. "Because it appears the property your parents believed they controlled is no longer legally tied to your names. After verifying the latest filings in public records, we discovered the deed now lists only your name. You are the sole legal owner." My heart kicked like a startled rabbit. I hadn't changed a thing, at least not knowingly. And that's where everything really started to unravel. When I hung up, my mind was spinning so fast it was a relief to be back in Caleb's apartment. I paced the small living room, the faint scent of his incense doing nothing to calm me. The thought that my parents, my own mother and father, could be blindsided by something I'd done, it felt like stepping into someone else's nightmare. The lawyer, Richard Green, insisted on an in-person meeting. I agreed, partly out of curiosity, partly because I needed to see the truth for myself. 2 hours later, I was sitting across from him in a sleek office overlooking downtown. He was in his 50s, gray at the temples, impeccably dressed, and he exuded that authority lawyers always have. I realized quickly he was the only adult in the room who wasn't playing a game. "Alex," he began, shuffling papers, "your parents contacted us 2 days ago, panicked, claiming someone may have fraudulently altered the ownership of their property. We reviewed the county records." He paused, letting the words sink in, "and confirmed that the deed now lists only your name. You are the sole legal owner." I blinked, my hands curled around my backpack strap. "That's impossible. I didn't—" "Not knowingly," he interrupted gently. "You didn't have to. We traced the filings. It appears that during the estate adjustment after your grandfather's death, the paperwork granting joint ownership was never fully rescinded. And because of a reversion clause triggered by non-compliance with certain tax reporting conditions, the property automatically reverted to the last remaining co-owner listed in good standing. You." "Reverted to me?" That's when I remembered. Last summer, when helping Mom file a minor estate document, I'd insisted on reviewing every line, even made her initial clauses she hadn't read. At the time, I thought I was being thorough. But in doing so, I'd unknowingly preserved my status as an active, documented co-owner, while their administrative oversight invalidated theirs. I'd reviewed the deed months ago, not just glanced, but studied it, trying to understand how inheritance worked. That knowledge, tucked away silently, had become armor. Richard leaned forward, voice low, almost conspiratorial. "They're desperate because they assumed you'd never act. They never expected you'd check the deed or follow through with your legal rights." I laughed, bitter and hollow. "So all their threats, the changed locks, the texts, the smug little messages, they thought I was powerless?" He nodded. "Exactly. And that panic you heard in their voice when they contacted us, that's genuine fear. They've built their lives around controlling what they believe they own, and suddenly, legally, it's not theirs." A part of me wanted to feel victorious. I wanted to call them, taunt them, demand apologies. But the voice in the back of my head, the one that had been steady since the locks changed, urged caution. This was bigger than pride, bigger than revenge. This was about exposing control for what it really was.
I spent the next hour going through the filings with Richard, absorbing details about joint tenancy, reversion clauses, and tax missteps. It was dense, but one thing became painfully clear. I'd accidentally prepared my own defense months ago, without ever realizing it. The next step, Richard explained, was delicate. My parents couldn't simply reclaim the property without going to court, and even then, the odds were stacked against them. But they could attempt persuasion, guilt, emotional manipulation, something he warned they were very good at.
Leaving the office, I realized I was holding myself in a strange tension, equal parts exhilarated and nauseated. The city air smelled faintly of rain and gasoline, sharp on my tongue. I drove back to Caleb's, my mind replaying every Sunday dinner, every casual question, every friendly reminder about bills or insurance. It all felt like rehearsal for this moment of revelation. That night, Dylan texted me again nervously. "Mom and Dad are freaking out. They don't know what to do. Don't tell anyone yet." I didn't respond. I wanted him to see the power shift for himself, to feel what it meant when adults you trusted panic because their assumptions of control were wrong. Over the next few days, I kept my movements minimal. I didn't post on social media, didn't speak to neighbors, didn't answer their increasingly frantic voicemails. But I did start collecting small proofs, snapshots of the deed and notes from Richard so I could respond if they escalated. I realized they were the ones holding the emotional cards, guilt, nostalgia, memories, but I now held the legal hand. Then came the first attempt at manipulation. Mom showed up at the corner coffee shop I frequent, apparently running errands, but clearly watching me. She smiled, that practiced mix of warmth and condescension that made my stomach twist. "Alex, honey," she said, sliding into the booth across from me. "I don't know why you're being so difficult. We just want to talk. Don't you think this is better in person?" I sipped my coffee, slow and deliberate. The aroma of roasted beans and sugar hit me as sharply as her tone. "Talk?" I asked evenly. "You mean the text? The locks? The threat?" She frowned, startled. "Threat? Oh, Alex, don't be dramatic. We're your parents. You know we just want what's best." I wanted to laugh, but the absurdity was too cruel. The woman who had locked me out now claimed concern. I realized in that moment, they would never admit fear, never admit they'd miscalculated. The only path forward was patient, deliberate, and silent observation. That evening, I started drafting a plan. Not to humiliate them publicly, not yet, but to ensure that if they tried another power play, I'd be ready. I would let them see the consequences of their arrogance, and deep down, I felt a rush of clarity. For the first time, I could act without fear. Because the truth was, I already had. 2 days later, the storm hit. Not literally, though the rain that swept through Brookfield that afternoon felt symbolic, but in the form of my parents, lawyers in tow, showing up at the property. I stayed in the shadows, watching from the side street as Martin's usual calm veneer cracked and Karen's carefully trained smile faltered. Martin had advised me not to confront them directly. Let the panic speak for itself. So I watched as they stepped onto the porch, keys jingling in hand, only to stop short when they saw the no trespassing sign I'd placed quietly the night before. "Alex?" Mom's voice wavered, a tone I had never heard. Even at 57, she sounded small. I stayed in the car. I didn't respond. The lawyers began flipping through folders, murmuring about filing motions, potential miscommunications, and corrective measures, all while my parents' faces drained of color. I noticed how they argued in hushed, urgent tones, glancing repeatedly at the house as though it might rise up and bite them. For the first time, I realized that their obsession with control had made them predictable. Their panic was almost poetic.
I didn't have to do anything. All I had to do was exist as the legal owner.
Later, Dylan texted me, practically vibrating through the screen. Mom's crying. Dad looks like he aged 10 years. They're begging the lawyers for options. This is unreal. I didn't answer. Part of me wanted to savor it, but another part felt the familiar pull of caution. This wasn't about revenge in the petty sense. It was about exposure. I wanted them to see the consequences of misjudging me, the results of underestimating their child. By evening, Richard called. "They're prepared to negotiate," he said carefully. "They want to offer concessions, financial compensation, even apologies if you relinquish ownership." I laughed softly. "Compensation? I don't want their money. I want them to understand that control isn't theirs to wield." He chuckled, clearly impressed. "Fair, but be prepared. Some parents, well, they'll push every boundary." True to form, the escalation came that night in the form of a long, dramatic email chain copied to every family member and our extended circle of friends. Karen framed it as a desperate plea. "Alex, this is tearing the family apart. Please reconsider. This is not who we are. Think of the memories." Martin's tone was sterner but laced with guilt. "We made mistakes. We just want to fix this. Don't force legal action, please." I stared at the screen, heart steady, fingers hovering over the keyboard. I could reply with venom, public humiliation, or silent triumph. But I didn't. Instead, I drafted a short, calm response. "The property is legally mine. I have no desire to escalate matters further. If you want reconciliation, it starts with accepting boundaries, not breaking them. The ball is in your court." I hit send. Silence. Over the next week, my parents attempted a few more tactics: unscheduled visits, guilt-laden texts, and even trying to sway Dylan to their side. But every effort faltered. Dylan, I realized, had finally started seeing the cracks. He even sent me a late-night text. "I get it now. They can't control everything. Not you, not the house." I smiled quietly. For the first time, the house, the one I grew up in, the one I thought I'd lost, felt truly mine. Not just because the deed said so, but because I had navigated the storm calmly, without panicking, without lashing out. Weeks later, the lawyers called with final paperwork confirming the ownership had been fully updated and any previous claims for my parents nullified. It was clean, undeniable, and completely legal. The sense of relief was overwhelming. I walked through the house that evening, sunlight spilling through the living room windows, the faint scent of cedar lingering in the air. I let myself feel it, the quiet power of being prepared, the satisfaction of fairness prevailing over manipulation. I never blocked my parents' numbers, didn't go scorched earth publicly. I let them exist in the knowledge of their own misjudgment. That, I realized, was enough. And yet, the lingering question remained. Would they ever really accept boundaries, or were they destined to test limits forever? Sometimes I still get small texts from them, slightly more neutral now, less threatening. A shared holiday invite, a vague question about a recipe, nothing controlling, nothing dramatic, just fragments of what family can be if respect replaces manipulation. And me? I've learned a lesson worth more than any property or inheritance. Sometimes the quiet, patient strategy, armed with preparation, legality, and observation, can turn the tables in ways anger never could. But in the back of my mind, I can't help wondering, what would you have done in my place, knowing that the people you trusted most could misjudge you so thoroughly?